Laugh Comics 396. Salem almost gets hit by a falling tree branch, and he thinks that that's the third nearly fatal accident he's been through. Then he realizes that all that bad luck has been because of Boris, a witch cat that's eviler than him. While he's not that different a concept from Salem, it's still interesting to see a witch cat around that Sabrina doesn't own, and it's impressive that it took this long for this obvious idea to be used. I just have to assume that Salem can't take away magic, because he doesn't do that to Boris and instead makes a hose for him. Sabrina catches him and assumes that Boris didn't deserve that. So it sure is too bad that she never witnessed Boris abuse magic herself when Salem knows he's a witch, and she walks around a lot outside too. So she takes away the magic from Salem, which is frustrating of course. If Salem has magic, why didn't he make himself able to talk, or talk to her telepathically before this? Well, there's always the risk that she wouldn't believe him about Boris. But there'd have still been a chance for him to avoid this punishment. He should have known not being able to talk to her would backfire, and gotten sick of it by now. Salem really should have taken away Boris's magic if Sabrina can do it to him, but instead he was mad enough to do something else to him. Salem thinks that Boris can sense that he lost his magic. He can merely sense it? It would have been more believable if he heard Sabrina say what she did. This is just a different universe where witch cats can do that. Maybe it's only witch cats. So we have to deal with Salem getting magic abuse. Hey, at least Boris used magic to clean him up with soap and water. While cats hate baths, it was still good of him to clean the garbage off him. Better for his health. Sabrina thankfully feels sorry for Salem and dries him off. Best of all, she already decides to give him back his powers. But he'll only be able to do good deeds with his magic. If that was a spell she could cast, why didn't she cast it when she first learned that he had powers? In fact, why didn't Sabrina's aunts use the spell on Sabrina in the 90s and 2000s? A lot of those plots had no reason to happen then. So, I guess how the spell works is that her magic sends a nanobot in his mind that monitors what he's going to use magic for and figures out if it's a good deed or not. Salem's mad that he can't get back at Boris. I wonder if things aren't as bad as he thinks. Salem sees the city pound van, and conveniently, Boris is taking a nap. So he magically knots Boris's tail so that he can't do any more harm with magic. Why are any and more one word? I assume the knotting of his tail magically isn't painful to him. It'd still annoy him, but I assume the reason it counts as a good deed is that his magic knows that Boris is all about abusing magic, and so does more good than evil to cast the spell. I expected Sabrina's spell to make it impossible to use spells that have any amount of evil to them at all. Salem can cast a spell to open the door of the pound van and free all of the dogs trapped inside. Even though there's a possibility that all of the dogs would end up adopted at the pound. Not to mention the person driving the van will end up upset when he finds out the dogs vanished and freak out about it. So Salem's magic must be able to guess the future by scanning the minds of everyone and figure out that the dogs aren't going to end up adopted. So his magic is just saving their lives, which is going to be worth it. Boris ends up chased by the dogs, and thankfully the story ends with Salem summoning fish for stray cats. This story by George Glatter was about Salem having to deal with an evil witch cat. And then Sabrina has the brilliant idea to cast a spell so that he'll only be able to do good deeds with his magic. Predictably, he figures out how to get back at Boris anyways. He frees dogs from the pound van to send them after him. As I expected, because it was a Salem story, I never got to see the witch family that takes care of Boris. Of course, the whole plot could have been avoided if Salem had the good sense to use his magic so that it could talk to Sabrina telepathically, to warn her about Boris being evil so that she wouldn't get rid of his powers just to decide to give them back with a limit. But maybe Sabrina wouldn't have believed him and would dismiss any memories she'd be shown by him as fake. And it is believable that he hated Boris so much that he only thought to use magic for revenge, and didn't immediately think to tie up his tail. Archie 343. Sabrina says to Ambrose that it was nice of Hilda to invite her and him to her 50s costume bash. And the 50s was the best decade she experienced. Hilda meant the 1650s, so they showed up in the wrong outfits. Hilda would have told them which exact century she meant. Too bad she doesn't explain why she thinks that about that decade. Nowadays, because people don't believe in witches, she can get away with magic in public. So why does she think the old days were better anyways? Laugh Comics 397. Sabrina wants to go to the beach, and surprisingly, Hilda wants to go with her and says it's been 150 years since she went there. Which is confusing because there's been stories where she went to the beach and hated it before this. This must take place in a different universe. Or it's before all of those stories. Hilda summons a horse and carriage to supply the transportation, somehow not realizing that it attracts attention in a world where everyone clearly has a car. Sabrina actually doesn't tell her aunts no, which makes sense because they're in charge of her. But she's told them what she wants plenty of times and gotten them to humor her. She points out that this method of transportation would be too slow, rather than saying it'd be conspicuous. Hilda uses magic so that the carriage flies. Why doesn't she just have them fly to the beach on brooms at that point? She just really didn't want to zap away the horse and carriage. Hilda surprises the person at the beach parking toll, and Hilda hates Sabrina's swimsuit and magically changes it to look different. At least it's red. It looks nice actually. Her dialogue was stilted though. It's too exposition filled. How does she know it's from the 1920s? It's surprisingly amusing that Hilda went out of her way to change the swimsuits of the other women on the beach to look more old-fashioned. Sabrina gets offered witch food and thinks it's gross and wants normal food. At this point, why does she have a problem with it when she was raised with it? A lot of stories before this had her be fine with it, and I doubt they'd taste that terrible if tons of people eat them. Hilda summons a fridge full of food, with Zelda thinking that it won't be as tasty. And when Hilda gets a frisbee thrown at her head and she's mocked, she magically sends the guy into space. I have to assume that the yellow light around him is an air bubble keeping him alive. Shockingly, we don't immediately see Sabrina tell her aunt to bring him back. So I have to assume that for her to be in character, she's waiting until her aunts aren't around to summon him back. And I assume the light around him means that he's not going to die out there. That'd be surprisingly dark. Jarringly so. But he was a jerk, so it's not too much to handle. Zelda summons a violinist, and Sabrina says that's too old-fashioned. Hilda's out of character and agrees with Sabrina instead of not caring about what people around her think. She says they need someone more modern and summons a piano player. The story ends with Sabrina admitting that going to the beach with her aunts wasn't boring. She should have known that. I just assumed that she only said it'd be boring because it'd take forever to get to the beach by a horse-drawn carriage. This story by George Glatter was about Sabrina's aunts insisting on going to the beach with Sabrina. And it takes advantage of them being witches a lot, as Hilda summons a horse-drawn carriage to get there. Probably sends someone to his death for throwing something at her. And summons a fridge and a musician to entertain her. She also changes the swimsuits around her to be more old-fashioned. She's not trying hard enough to hide that she's a witch. But I like that it makes the story more interesting, and they must be assuming nobody would try to tell anyone about the crazy things they saw anyways. And that the women would assume that they forgot they came to the beach just like that. Betty's Diary 4. Sabrina says her aunts love VCRs as they go into a video store. The guy working there wonders if they're the ones that reserved a bunch of monster movies, and Hilda should know she's just going to confuse him by calling them family-type movies just because she's a witch for some reason. RG 344. While flying on a broom with Sabrina, Hilda says they now have in-flight movies, as the TV's in front of her precariously balanced on the broom, which is nothing that a spell keeping the TV stuck to the broom would solve. Why would it be only just now? She wonders why no witch ever thought of this before, just like I did. Then she crashes and the TV breaks, and Sabrina says now they know. It's because it distracts the driver and the TV broke. Though she could have cast an invincibility spell on the TV. I think it'd have made more sense for Sabrina to make this mistake and not Hilda, because it involves using modern mortal technology and doing something inventive with her broom. Well, Hilda's been flying for so long that she should have known better. I think the reason I was wondering why no witch ever did this, aside from the fact that there's been witches for centuries, is that obviously if they were flying high up enough, if they were flying in a place where there's no way they were going to fly into something, then of course there would be nothing wrong with watching TV while flying. Betty Me 154. Hilda has an entry in a hobby show next to someone's hat collection. And it's a collection of brooms, since she's not very subtle. Is a hobby show a competition? Why would she think she'd win? All the brooms look almost the same, so what's the point of collecting them? Pep 409. Someone apologizes and tells some homeless people that the soup kitchen just ran out of food. And Sabrina thinks that's awful and zaps up some food. Hilda shows up out of nowhere walking over to her and nags her for using magic for good. She doesn't need to spend more than one panel nagging her. Thankfully, after she tells her to follow her, she doesn't use magic against those homeless people. She uses magic and turns up the volume on someone's headphones. I have to assume Sabrina won't undo her spell because she knows that Hilda would just do the spell again, freaking them out even more. She casts a spell to make the automatic teller show a message to someone saying, "I do not give money to women in red dresses." That's actually a good joke because it's so specific and petty and would never happen with these machines. Hilda makes someone's wig leap off and tells Sabrina to use magic for evil. But surprisingly, it cuts to the next day when I thought she was gonna reluctantly use magic for evil in front of Hilda, because she wanted her to. Sabrina sees some girls make fun of someone's dress for no good reason, making her cry. Sabrina consoles her and uses magic to rip the girls' clothes. For some reason, the principal isn't Weatherby, with no explanation, and accuses them of having Halloween costumes, instead of just being concerned and curious about what did this to their clothes. So apparently this takes place in a universe where Weatherby isn't the principal, but not explaining that is confusing for nothing. I love that Sabrina's victims are jerks, and combine that with the fact that it's in a school setting, which is very rare for 70s and 80s Sabrina stories, and I really like this. School is most of a teenager's life, so it's important to show how she'd abuse her powers in school finally. She notices a bully push a guy, telling him to get out of his way and call him a punk for no reason, as if he hates criminals when he's clearly a bad guy himself. He also kicks a dog, telling it to stay away from him instead of just walking around it, which is dumb since the dog could bite him for it. Instead of making the dog bite him, Sabrina casts a spell to spray him with a fire hydrant, which is the better alternative because it lets the dog get away from him and not provoke him any further. Hilda tells Sabrina she was real wicked, and I just have to assume she knew what she did because Della or one of her spies told her, because she can't be omniscient. Her idea of a reward is to say she'll grant her wishes even though Sabrina can grant her own, so she wouldn't get excited about it. The story ends with her telling Hilda that she'll use those wishes for good, even though she'd know Hilda wouldn't approve and would decide not to grant the wishes. This was a great story. At first it was just frustrating because after Sabrina does a great deed, Hilda wastes a whole page nagging her and then uses magic for evil. At least it was interesting because of how mundane her magic was, turning people's technology against them. Then I got to see Sabrina use magic against bullies, so that was awesome. It's too bad the story couldn't fit in a third time she abused her magic, because too much time was taken up by Hilda's complaining, which stood out to me because in lots of 80s stories, Hilda's nice for no reason. Archie Me 160. Sabrina goes to an official publisher and wants him to publish Hilda's recipes, and he says he'll only do it if they're weird. So he gets shocked at seeing witch recipes. Only witches with the ability to make themselves immune to poison would be able to survive eating cobra venom pie. The only way they could be immune to poison is if they became robots. They look like humans, so I'd assume they'd have the same DNA as them. I guess the witches cast a spell to make cobra venom harmless, but then that changes its molecular structure, so why would it still have magic in it for potions anymore? Wouldn't it be obvious that Hilda wouldn't want media attention from people cringing at her crazy recipes and saying that they sound witch-like? I guess Sabrina knew he'd never publish them and just wanted to have some fun with them. RJ at Riverdale High, 112. Zelda sweetly hands Sabrina some brew for her cold, but out of nowhere it turns out Sabrina's allergic to cobra scales and bat wings. So this is a different universe from any story where she ate those with no problem. They'd cast a spell to undo that allergy. Sabrina says when you're a teen witch, you're grateful for every allergy, even though most of your allergies wouldn't be to witch ingredients. If witches could do anything, they could cure allergies too. Laugh Comics 398. Zelda hopes the hotel will have nice rooms, and Hilda says she reserved their deluxe haunted suite. Sabrina tells her aunts to go on up while she goes on a walk to stretch her legs. Hilda warns her that strange things happen in Transylvania, even though it's just another place on Earth. I'm just forced to assume that it's the other realm Transylvania, because the real one wouldn't have deluxe haunted suites. Then someone turns into a werewolf and says that it always makes him want to jump at Sabrina howling. Sabrina protects herself by sending him away with a gust of wind and covering him with fleas. Then she calls him a weird wolf instead of just a werewolf, for some reason. I love how she effortlessly defended herself instead of just screaming and running away and needing protection. These stories are so much cooler than the later ones. A scientist invented a Frankenstein. He clearly only makes sense if he was a warlock scientist. Sabrina doesn't like the clothes of that Frankenstein, so she uses magic to give him a new look. At least that's inventive instead of her using magic to hurt him. He gets shown himself in the mirror and runs away scared for no reason. Sabrina sees a giant castle door and goes to greet a vampire, not scared of him at all, which makes sense because she's a witch. He calls her pretty, and she casts a spell to summon a soda machine for his thirst. For no reason, instead of him properly reacting to her being a witch he'd be helpless against, he says, "Enough small talk," as if he's got a chance of success at this point, and turns into a bat. Sabrina turns into a baseball bat, which really makes me smile as it reminds me of when Hilda turned into a Louisville bat in front of a vampire. She also amuses me saying, "Let's find out who has a better batting average." It doesn't let us actually see her hit him, unfortunately. And Hilda gets to see a news report that word has come in of a monster terrorizing the citizens of Transylvania. Sabrina's aunts get scared and feel guilty, and Hilda says she knew they shouldn't have let Sabrina go out by herself, even though they know that she's a witch. Why would Zelda think Sabrina's helpless? The story ends with Hilda seeing that Sabrina's the monster, as described by witnesses. This story is about Sabrina vacationing with her aunts in what I have to assume is the witch's Transylvania, and she arbitrarily decides to go for a walk alone for some exercise. So she ends up being seen as a monster by the civilians because she protects herself against two people that tried to hurt her and gives someone some new clothes. Sure, he didn't like them, but his owner could have sold them, so it's not fair for her to get seen as the bad guy. I liked this story because it was cool seeing Sabrina easily defend herself. Archie's Girls 345. Someone says to Sabrina that she sees her mother's car in the parking lot, so she must be at the PTA meeting. Sabrina sees that her aunt came to the meeting too, and she can tell because she can see her broom, and just says that she doesn't use a car. Archie's Pals and Gals 185. Sabrina walks home in a cheerleader outfit, and Hilda says her cheerleading outfit brings back memories of when she was at Transylvania High, even though that would have been centuries ago, which makes sense because witches would be more advanced than non-witches from having more free time to study science right from the start. Hilda says that when she was a cheerleader, her team's opponents never dared to win because they were terrified of the team mascots. Then that wouldn't be allowed because it'd be an unfair advantage. Betty Me 155. Zelda figures out she's gained weight and tells Sabrina that from now on it's no more Batwing chips or swamp cola for her. If she cared about her weight, she would have magically made herself skinny a long time ago. Pep 410. Sabrina wonders where the horses are on the racetrack, and Ambrose wonders how many times he has to tell her that it's a witch's racetrack. Why would he need to tell her more than once? But I like this idea because of course witches would do this. Archie Giant Series 566. At first the story seems too familiar to the point where I wonder if I reviewed it already because Sabrina's family is getting ready for Christmas but doesn't have a tree. So why did they think they were ready? But then Zelda zaps up an overly large one. Why would she be able to do that by accident? Hilda says Zelda never could measure, somehow. She takes some of the top of it off, and it's thrown out of the window when Jughead wants it, thinking it's pretty nice. The tree's too big, so he snips off the top and decides to put it in Hot Dog's doghouse, and snips off the top of it again. Then inexplicably, Hot Dog offers the very top of it to some rabbits, even though a dog wouldn't do that. And some rabbits offer the top of the tree to mice, which also wouldn't happen, of course. Sabrina casts a spell and all of the different Christmas trees light up for no reason, even though she only tried to cast a spell on the tree in front of her. That's it? That story sucked. There's no conflict. All that happened in the story is that for no reason, Zelda somehow creates a Christmas tree that's too big, so the top of it gets cut off, rather than the tree getting shrunk. And Jughead finds the tree, and that keeps happening again with animals, when obviously they wouldn't care enough about other species or Christmas to do that, or know how to use scissors. This only happened to try to make a nice charming ending where all of the different trees magically lit up at once, with a star that got summoned by Sabrina. That was nice, but why did mice on normal mortal Earth have clothes? That was just silly and pointless with almost no plot. So I'm glad it's short. RG Giant Series 568 Primetime. A badly drawn Hilda says she loved the cake and ice cream, and Zelda says it's too bad it's all gone. Hilda's nice enough to cast a spell to bring her and her family back an hour in time, so that they can eat it all again. I wonder if this expends a lot more magic than simply summoning the desserts again. Everything's Archie 127. Sabrina finds it boring when witches talk because they only seem to talk about witch-related stuff, unrealistically. Hilda tells Sabrina she bought a TV set and VCR and floats them over to her in boxes, and she also bought video cassettes on witch stuff. Jughead 350. Hilda and Sabrina enjoy the merry-go-round. It's out of character for Hilda. Sabrina finds the ride so comfortable that she decides to fly with one of the merry-go-round horses, and wants to throw away her broom, but Hilda just looks shocked, so she probably thinks it's stupid. Archie's Girls 346. Someone tells Sabrina she likes being a cheerleader at Transylvania High because none of their opponents dare to beat them when their school mascots are monsters, because it's a witches' school. Betty's Diary 6. Sabrina suddenly says that witch school isn't so bad. I don't know why she'd ever be sent to one now. She says that detention sucks though, as we see some students in stocks. Lap Comics 399. A mailman says he's never carried such a heavy load of mail. So because Esmeralda's with her, Sabrina figures out it's her fault, and takes the big rock out of his mail pouch. Zelda's broom breaks in mid-flight because of Esmeralda. It's shocking that even Zelda isn't exempt. She says she was bored, and I have to assume Zelda refused to punish her just because Della wants witches to be evil, even though it makes no sense for them to be allowed to abuse other witches. Sabrina doesn't waste time complaining about this, and instead says they've got a special hotline to Santa's headquarters and wants to give him a call. Santa says Esmeralda's getting nothing for Christmas, but her parents would buy her gifts for it anyways. Why wouldn't they? In fact, Esmeralda even says she could zap up her own presents. Out of nowhere, she can't use magic. And out of complete nowhere, Sabrina says that witches can't use magic at 6 p.m. of Christmas Eve. This would only be believable if she was lying to her to get back at her. What does she mean by 6 p.m.? At first I assumed she meant that witches suddenly wouldn't have powers for all of Christmas Eve and Christmas. And I guess that's what Esmeralda assumes. But once she goes into denial and asks her if she gets her powers back after 6 p.m., who cares if she has to wait an hour? Why would Della make this the case? Esmeralda decides to feed a bird some bread. Well, the story wants us to see this as uncharacteristic generosity of hers. The truth is that bread barely gives any nutrition to birds, and they definitely can't survive on just that. Ducks are better off being given peas, for example. So this good deed counts for nothing. Then she sees that someone dropped one of her packages from a toy store. Then after wanting to keep the present, she feels bad for the kid it belongs to and decides to bring it to her, which doesn't make any sense of her character. Santa even said that all her bad deeds this year filled up 5 volumes. So her doing good deeds now couldn't possibly make up for all of that. But just because of 2 good deeds she did, not even 3 like I expected, Santa gives her a computer because it was told about them by a last-second readout. Well, it kind of feels nice. She didn't do enough to earn this. Hilda even points out that she'd only be good for a few days. This story by George Glatter was about Esmeralda doing 2 good deeds uncharacteristically after being told that she won't get any gifts for Christmas from Santa for being mean. And out of nowhere, witches can't use magic at 6 p.m. of Christmas Eve. Which Dell wouldn't make the case. Santa would have to be a warlock to make that the case. She'd also assumed that her parents would be giving her gifts anyways. Somehow she got gifts from Santa because of a measly 2 good deeds after 5 volumes of bad deeds. One of those good deeds doesn't even count because bread is almost worthless in nutritional value for birds. So they're just filling up their stomach on nothing. If only she had the internet, it would have taken 1 second for her to Google that. Everything's Archie 128. A door-to-door salesman tries to sell Hilda a home entertainment center. And she shows him some monsters that must be her friends visiting and says they already have one, wanting to freak him out for bothering her. Too bad it stuck with an inferior artist. But that went without saying with any story with that style. Archie 346. Sabrina flies around on a broom a lot and amazes Ambrose as she does a loop and doesn't fall off the broom. He bets there's nothing she can't do with the broom, and Hilda complains that she doesn't sweep her room. She's apparently too lazy to even point to magically clean it up. Pep 411. Sabrina sees a father walk out of a place with some kids telling them it hasn't snowed all week, so there's no sense in staying here. And Sabrina tells Hilda that she should zap up some snow for them to ski with. Hilda's jarringly out of character by refusing to, with the bullshit excuse not to fool with Mother Nature. I'm sure one of them has zapped up snow before with no consequences. She did that in Snow Throw. And this isn't by Bob Bowling, it's by the creator of Sabrina, so there's no excuse. Hilda says she acted on good authority that it's gonna snow. Unless she means Mother Nature herself, that makes no sense and she should have questioned her on that. Or just assumed she meant Mother Nature, or maybe she thinks she knows a way to see the future. Sabrina wants to keep a family at the ski resort until it's snow, so she magically pops one of their tires. Her aunts are proud of her, which is sweet, even if they shouldn't be. Then the father's kid tells him it's snowing by the time Sabrina and her family are in a room unpacking. So if Sabrina hadn't done that, they would have had to turn around and drive back there. At least I hope it's been a long time since the flat tire, because if it literally started snowing just a few seconds after the flat tire happened, she would have given them a flat tire for nothing. Someone calls Sabrina's aunts creeps for no reason and drives by them on a snowmobile. He heads towards some kids as Hilda uncharacteristically can't think of an insult for him. Sabrina casts a spell to save the kids, making some giant snow show up on top of a mountain and fall on the guy. Her aunts are proud of her again. And Sabrina sees a woman with a pleased smile near a guy who also looks happy. So she assumes they want a date but are too shy to, and casts a spell to make the ski lift they're on get stuck to give them some more time together. But for all she knows, they're siblings, or he's married to someone else. It's interesting that she and her family are flying away on skis, as fortunately the 2 people are happy and Sabrina thinks they're getting to know each other well. Why would Hilda say, "a word with you," and "we want to say one thing," when she'd only say that if she disapproved, when she approves? And why would Sabrina think she'd get punished or insulted? She knows them better than that. So the story ends with Hilda putting her hand on her shoulder with them proud of her. This story was about Sabrina using magic to inconvenience people at the ski resort for well-intentioned reasons that make it worth it. And her aunts think she's just doing it to be evil, even though they know her. They just assume she's blowing off some steam. I like that nothing she does actually backfires as far as we know. Benemy 156. Hilda can somehow tell that she and Sabrina are being watched, and so can she, when they normally don't possess that ability. And they're being seen on radar. And somehow, rather than being blips on the radar, the blips are literally silhouettes of them. Archie's Pals and Gals 188. Sabrina watches TV and wishes she had a doll as a kid, so this ignores the story Witch Kit warning. Hilda says she gave her a beautiful doll for her 5th birthday. It was a voodoo doll with a pin in it, and the only reason Hilda would think it was beautiful would be that she's a witch who thinks ugly is beautiful. Jughead 352. Hilda finds record stores relaxing because she doesn't feel conspicuous in the crowd. even though she's still the only one dressed like a witch. She just thinks the young people look so crazy that she doesn't stick out. I suppose I like how they look. And it's interesting of her to buy records. Betting me 158. Ambrose says girls never give him a second to look, and wishes girls stared at him hour after hour. So Hilda turns his head into a TV. Which must be just a prank, because that only freaked people out. I assume his brain is still there. It's just a CPU now, so he's still alive. Archie 348. A librarian tells Sabrina she has a book and she'll need to use the reference file to locate it. Sabrina looks cool by thinking to cast a spell to make the right book fly over to her, using magic to scan the librarian to find out which book to send to her.